Your new novel, Dissident Gardens, which I have to say I hugely enjoyed.
Thank you.
Is about 3 generations of left-wingers starting in Queens in New York. And I have to say, it's a totally unsympathetic portrait of the American left.
Is it?
That's how it read to me. Did you think about it?
I would say for me, writing it, it was a helplessly human portrait of the American left. I wanted to write about people and lives and all the frustration and yearning and confusion that comes out of committing yourself to wanting to change the world.
So you grew up in this milieu in New York and in Brooklyn. You had a grandmother in Queens and Sunnyside Gardens who was some kind of a communist. You grew up in kind of a commune. I mean, what was your attitude towards those politics growing up? Were you just so immersed in it that was the water you swam in, or did you have some perspective on it?
Well, children take their world as givens, and I was in a family of not ideological communists by any measure, but of dissenters, hippie, leftist, anti-war radicals who marched around a lot. Were very ready to take up a banner and go into the streets. And I was coming of age inside that family at a time when, in some ways, it could be mistaken for like a natural center of American culture. It was, the first years I remember in my life are 1969, 1970. 1971. So
when you were 5, 6.
Absolutely. And I remember, I think in some ways, the first moment I had to adjust my sense that any right-thinking person, any person I'd ever meet in my life was on the same team, was when Nixon was elected in 72. And I just couldn't comprehend that someone had voted, someone had pulled a lever for this, this guy who in the imaginative life of my family basically seemed like a vampire. It was like, we elected the vampire president?
You've always drawn on your childhood, written about your family in so many of your novels, but here you seem to really be writing about your family history in a almost more explicit way.
In some ways more explicitly, but that can also be very deceptive.
Yeah.
The book is a great container, a very satisfying container to me for autobiographical sentiment, for feeling, for this impulse of wanting to reach back into the past and understand my mother and my grandmother. And so it's a vehicle for those impulses in me, but a lot of the facts I made up, a lot of the events I made up are crazy fantasy.
You are famous as a Brooklyn novelist, although you haven't lived in Brooklyn for a few years now. And I sort of thought the premise here before I started reading the book was Jonathan Lethem does Queens, tries another borough. And in some ways about a very specific slice of Queens. But is that something you consciously set out to do, to write about a different part of New York than the one that you're most grounded in?
Well, I'd say a few things about that. First of all, I never did anything but a very specific slice of Brooklyn.
Yeah.
I really, both Brooklyn and Queens are beyond anyone's command. You can't write a novel that's comprehensive about the life of a place so various and so contradictory and just so extensive. When I wrote The Fortress of Solitude, I didn't think I'm going to do Brooklyn, I'm going to command Brooklyn. I thought, I'm going to tell you about one block of Dean Street in 1972. That's what I can do. And this image of me as somehow the Brooklyn maestro is obviously flattering, but it doesn't mean that I know anything beyond the limits of my understanding of my own, what I witnessed. In Queens, I have an even smaller domain, right? I have my grandmother's apartment. It's all filtered through her little orbit, her little precincts. But those are very compelling to me. And so I knew I had something there, that they still were mysterious to me, these experiences I'd had growing up, spending time there with her, and that it was enough. It was something I could get my teeth into and make a book out of. But I don't have some project. You're
not doing Staten Island?
No, I'm definitely not doing Staten Island. I mean, but even if I did, it wouldn't be because I've committed myself to some sort of comprehensive tour of the boroughs, or that I think that I've somehow exhausted the ones that I've touched.